We built this city.
If you want a quick idea of what Guardians of the Galaxy is all about,
We built this city on rock and roll.
and where its priorities lie,
Built this city.
you only need to look at its title screen.
We built this city on rock and roll.
Drax the Destroyer sits comfortably on a couch with reading glasses, reading Sarcasm for Dummies. Groot stands in the corner with a plant, occasionally having a cheeky drink from a watering can when he thinks nobody's watching. Rocket fidgets and scratches impatiently as he tinkers with a bomb. Gamora sits mournfully, bathed in the purple light of the galaxy beyond, lost in a sad memory. And Peter Quill is meditating to 80s tunes, rifling from one song to the next, not able to commit to his favourite while he stares off into space. Since the 2014 movie, it's become all too easy to pigeonhole the Guardians of the Galaxy into single-sentence descriptions. Peter Quill lives in the 80s, Drax the Destroyer takes everything literally, Rocket Raccoon has wee man syndrome, Gamora is the deadliest woman in the universe, Groot says I am Groot. That's not to say James Gunn's films were shallow with their characterization. There's a reason these movies and characters resonated with fans so quickly. Gunn's interpretation set up 5 one-trick ponies in the first act, added layers in the second, and peeled back their vulnerabilities in the third, so that our understanding of this misfit family evolved as the characters transformed on screen. Rocket is more than his antagonistic nature. He's scarred, distrusting, and a master strategist. Groot is more than a catchphrase. There's a gentle wisdom to him. Drax is more than a joke. Fueled by rage, he's trapped in a past tragedy. Gamora is more than a quick-fire assassin, she also has a deadly wit. And Peter Quill is more than a walking jukebox. He's an inspiring, if obnoxious, leader. Whilst these versions of the Guardians differ slightly from how we knew them in the comics, they've quickly become the staple of how general audiences see this team. Hell, Quill, Gamora, Drax, Rocket and Groot didn't even make the Guardians until 2008, 18 years after Guardians of the Galaxy issue 1. But the zeitgeist has kind of forgotten this. These are your Guardians now, not the deeper characters we see in James Gunn's movies, but the single-sentence descriptions at the start of the first film. Where once Peter Quill was vengeful and cunning, hunting his mother's killer across the stars, he's now a naive idiot with a boyish charm and a love for 80s music. Where Drax was once a spiritual warrior, he's now a violent meathead. Except in the comics where he recently took a vow of pacifism. It's a good run, you should read it, links below. The Telltale game felt like an immediate jump-off to the way the Guardians were portrayed in the first 30 minutes of the MCU film, just carried over a laborious 8 hours. And the comics didn't hold their ground either. On the whole, they've remolded these characters to fit a cast more fitting with that movie. All of this is to say that the Guardians of the Galaxy, just like all comic book characters, have long and turbulent histories. Every character has undergone a metamorphosis or two since they were splashed onto the page, and with 53 characters joining and leaving the team over its rich history, there's a plethora of faces, voices, and power sets to pull from to form your Guardians of the Galaxy. And if you did feel bound by the shackles of using these 5 recognizable faces, there are hundreds of interpretations you could bring to make them feel fresh.
Gardeners of the Galaxy?
What? No, Rocket. So I let Groot fill out the paperwork.
Imagine my pleasant surprise then when I rolled the credits on Eidos Montreal's iteration. These Guardians are my favourite Guardians. They're so multidimensional they'd make the TVA worry, and that carries through from the opening line to Peter Quill's closing speech. The galaxy they con their way through is packed with heart and earnestness that makes something as simple as eavesdropping on a conversation between Rocket and Drax the highlight of a play session. The world building, the aesthetic, the tone couldn't be more in keeping with the vibe of this ramshackle group of lovable criminals. I think I love this game, and that might sound hyperbolic, but I can't stop thinking about how much fun it is. For the most part, Eidos understood the assignment, crafting one of my favourite video game superhero stories of all time. But it is far from perfect. In fact, I'd argue that Guardians of the Galaxy is a good game with great writing. The gameplay has some serious missteps which didn't sour my experience, but when they peeked out from behind the Milano, it showed just how desperately Guardians relies on its fantastic characterization. If you've seen the reviews, you know how lackluster the combat can be and how muddled the mechanics are. If this was an original story with original characters set in a galaxy not ripped from a comic book, I think I'd love it a little less. And it's important to remember that while watching this video, because that affinity I have to these characters has strengthened my love for Guardians despite its failings. This is in sharp contrast to the other superhero game Square Enix shat out of its warted arsehole, Marvel's Avengers. My love for the Avengers made that experience worse than just the disappointment that it was. It led to an unbridled rage that I turned into a video. Oh, and it still sucks, by the way. A pleasant surprise isn't just my way of describing Guardians of the Galaxy, it's 3 little words that I've seen everywhere since its release, and that is entirely down to how bad Marvel's Avengers was. It's cast such a long shadow that it's damaged the sales figures of this game.
Guardians of the Galaxy is developed by Eidos Montreal and it's published by Square Enix. And since its reveal, it's lived under the shadow of that other Square Enix published Marvel game, The Avengers. That is a train wreck still in motion as the game pulls out all the stops to try to plug the unpleasant gap it left in Square Enix's balance sheet.
A lot of people had extremely low expectations of Guardians. We'd been burned before, and that's made the gaming and superhero community rightfully wary of titles Square Enix releases. So when I heard reviewers describe Guardians of the Galaxy as a pleasant surprise, I couldn't help but wonder if they just enjoyed it because it wasn't as bad as Avengers. And when I saw Drax's knives poking through his back, or the subtitles having an aneurysm, I did start to wonder if the only reason I was having fun was because it still wasn't Avengers. You know what they say, do you really love something if you don't tear it apart and critique it? That's me, I say that. So we're going to walk through the whole game analysing it in its own right, breaking down its themes, structure, combat, exploration, comic book influences, all of it, to see how it fares as an experience all its own. But I have set some time aside to discuss where I think it succeeds, where Marvel's Avengers fails. Timestamps are below for those of you who just want to hear about Guardians, but I encourage you to hear me out all the way to the end, and let me know your own thoughts. Spoilers ahead, and this is a commentary and critique of Guardians of the Galaxy.
Lie on the hood of my old Chevy and listen to Black Sabbath and...
You like Black Sabbath?
Like I said, your mom's cooler than you think.
Dedicating our first 10 minutes to a 13-year-old Peter Quill just chilling in his bedroom is a brave choice for an action game, and I mean that as both a positive and a negative. This whole section is incredibly slow, but purposefully endearing, concentrating Peter's entire character through the lens of his immaturity, love of his mother, and his passion for music. His room is littered with trinkets and 80s Easter eggs which form that single-sentence description of Peter Quill I referenced earlier, but there's enough shifting and forming in the subtext for us to start to chew on already. The band Star-Lord that he listens to is playing one of the many songs that were created just for this game by the senior audio director Steve Skabowski, and we can feel the tendrils of the game's themes almost immediately. The song Peter's listening to, Zero to Hero, isn't Alan Menken's bop from Disney's Hercules, it's a rock song focused more on Quill's own origin. Unfortunately, I can't play it here because copyright, but look at the lyrics. From the time I was young, I knew this day would come. Mama, she said, son, you'll always be on the run. Your daddy was a man people wanted dead. Now that storm's coming for you, a price hanging on your head. As a game, Guardians never wastes an opportunity to set up some crucial foreshadowing. These lyrics directly reference Peter's future, the looming threat of the Chitauri and the murder of his mother, while they hunt for his father. Of course, none of this is necessarily new information to most players. The most wonderment we can get is a passing question of whether or not Quill's father will be Jason of Spartax like in the comics, or if the game will fully embrace the Disneyfication of the Guardians and make him Ego, the living planet. But what's really surprising here is how pivotal the action figure Meredith tosses us later becomes. The slow burn of the 80s nostalgia is enough to make any cynic roll their eyes while we wait to get to all the fun galactic stuff, but something as dumb as a tiny plastic Chewbacca has real importance. Here, it's just to add dimension to Star-Lord. Of course Chewbacca is a toy that's important to him. As an adult, he sees himself as a regular Han Solo, despite being more of an Act 1 Luke Skywalker as he lies in his bed, just with better hair. Good mullet. We learn as much about the game's tone in these opening moments as we do about Peter. The first real bit of gameplay we get is in the form of dialogue choices because the game's primary concern is investing ourselves in the type of Star-Lord we want to be. Despite the title being Guardians of the Galaxy, it could just as easily have been named The Legendary Star-Lord and The Guardians of the Galaxy. That's not to say the rest of the team take a back seat in the adventures. Some of them get as much emotional payoff as Peter does, but the game really wants you to see yourself as Star-Lord, legendary outlaw, leader of a band of misfits. The second thing we learn about the game is how much it enjoys its own punchlines. Whilst the player is transported into Peter's first-person view at numerous moments in the story to reinforce how keen it is for us to get into his head, I'm willing to bet that the main reason for it here is to slowly set up the reveal of his slack-jawed face and mullet. Lucky for us then that the game is really, really funny, even if my over-explaining kills some of the joy of the joke.
Holy crap, Drax. You gotta stop doing this, man. It's weird.
We are approaching the quarantine zone.
The third thing we're taught about the game only becomes truly clear when we jump forwards to present day. Guardians of the Galaxy is just one big fat excuse to chill with a bunch of entertaining people. Characterization comes way before action set pieces and the bang bang badass time. That stuff sits right at the back behind the clever world building and the teleporting llama. Just a few minutes of exploring the Milano lays down the status quo of the team. Peter, Rocket and Groot have been travelling together for a few years. Drax joined not long ago, and Gamora is brand new to the team, feeling completely out of sorts. She generally keeps away from her companions, training alone or sitting up in the cockpit so she doesn't need to speak to the others. Rocket doesn't like Drax or Gamora, so he sticks them on their own team when we all journey out to the quarantine zone, separating them from Peter so they can have some quality time alone. Drax calls Rocket a rodent any chance he gets, not necessarily out of cruelty, but because he's incredibly direct. Groot keeps out of the way because he doesn't want anything to do with the animosity. The bickering begins almost immediately.
How would we accidentally cross into the Nova Corps force field? Details!
Rocket! Why are the array cables everywhere on the floor?
Stop this ruckus at once!
Now look, I get it. I've seen the takes. Some people don't want to play 15 hours of hearing 5 aliens argue with each other. Some people also don't want to play 15 hours of being criticized by your intergalactic pals. I hear you, I understand. I don't see it that way at all. Whilst a story where the Guardians don't see eye to eye and then come together towards the end is hardly a revolutionary take on the team, and the incredibly detailed arguments our friends get into could be grating, there's a serious developed history here which the game goes to exhaustive lengths to constantly reference. We are no less than 5 minutes into our exploration of the Milano before Rocket starts reminiscing about an old job they managed to pull off. Drax hears him reference dancing and arches an eyebrow, smoothly requesting that Rocket and Groot refrain from creating this club of dance, and Rocket immediately cuts him off by barking, "Yeah, we all know how you feel about dancing." It's not that Drax just rubs Rocket up the wrong way by being so direct, it's his insistence to try and force his culture and belief system at any given point. Catathians don't dance, and it looks like Drax has reminded the team of this at numerous points. It's the gradual addition of these details that transforms the Guardians' incessant arguing from annoying to part of the fun. It starts to feel less like animosity as they journey through space and more like banter. Layers and layers are added to the characters which make them feel more personable than we might have expected. Rocket isn't just an angry little runt, he single-handedly keeps the Milano ticking over, highlighted at numerous points when Quill doesn't understand how certain parts of the ship work, or the various holes and crawl spaces we see. Being the most cavalier about their criminal escapades, he doesn't just see the Nova Corps as a nuisance, he flarkin hates them, despises these cops with every fibre of his being. Groot isn't just a tree man, he has a real adoration for plants and nature. His room is just the storage base so he can collect fauna and bring it back on the ship to grow, adding to his collection with each new fascinating planet we visit. Gamora isn't just an icy assassin, she finds joy in poking fun at the other Guardians. Her room is vibrant and pink and sentimental as hell. Drax has developed a hell of a crush for Lady Hellbender, and his inability to understand sarcasm means the exaggerated myths he's heard about her have become very, very real to him. Without these layers, yes, a full game of the Guardians railing on each other would get tiresome, and there are some moments later where the dialogue system seems a little rough around the edges, but hot damn, we haven't even fired our first blaster yet, and already the team feel real. We're already off to a strong start, and the game hasn't even shown one of its strongest hands yet.
I'm thinking that big cylinder thing is our rendezvous.
Yeah, that's the mining ring.
So weird seeing it all clustered together like this. Bits and pieces of a war that spanned the entire galaxy held together by pink goo.
Hunting for an unknown monster in the quarantine zone with all of its crumbling pinks and glossy purples gives us the opportunity to start letting loose a little. There's plenty to shoot, and the level design offers some alleyways for us to hunt for collectibles in, and this is where the context-aware dialogue begins. By far, one of the most impressive parts of the game. 2013's The Last of Us wasn't the first game to use this system, but it's certainly one of the more famous, mainly because it's formed a lot of Naughty Dog's industry marketing in the lead up to release. Hell, in 2016, the lead programmer Jason Gregory gave a really interesting GDC talk on how they built this system into their game, which again, I've linked below if you're interested. That famous moment when Ellie enters the record store and starts rifling through some of the music is a perfect example of this. Because the player has chosen to enter this location, Ellie's AI shows signs of being self-aware by immediately gravitating towards something which interests her and commenting on it. Guardians of the Galaxy also uses context-aware dialogue during exploration, not just with the environment, like Gamora commenting on some savage claw marks while out on the hunt, but with the player as well. During both of my playthroughs, I didn't find a single line of repeated dialogue. If the player ever goes off the beaten path to hunt for collectibles, the Guardians will question where you're going. They might even tease you or poke fun at you, and Quill will respond in kind. I'm particularly reminded of later when I took Peter up to a nearby ledge and Gamora asked him where he was off to. "I'm strategizing," Quill replied. "Up there, in an empty hallway?" Gamora scoffed. There's a wide array of dialogue for the Guardians to churn through, which makes their speech patterns always feel fluid, flexible, and realistic. They don't just comment on something that's happening, they regularly add a detail important to that space. There's constant chit-chat and banter between the team, and it isn't always triggered by progression. Sometimes it's just there to add flavor and depth. Here in the quarantine zone, I stood still for 15 full minutes to see what would happen to the dialogue, and I was met with Groot, Rocket, and Gamora reminiscing about the war, and Rocket coming up with ways he could rip off Gamora and Drax. There's never an aching silence while we uncover secrets and jog towards landmarks. Whilst the quality of the writing and the jokes are really, really strong, this makes the case for quantity as well when it comes to character writing. I couldn't find any numbers in interviews, but there's got to be pages and pages of dialogue for such a linear single-player campaign to keep the Guardians as well realised as they are.
Quill, you okay?
Yeah, it's just...
Quill has a fair few demons to overcome before the credits roll. His guilt over the death of his mother, his capacity as a leader, but what Chapter 1 sets up is his immaturity. Purely because of how competitive he is with Rocket, he unearths an Infinity Stone and Magus with it, which acts as the catalyst for the whole story. When Guardian's plot is boiled down to its most basic parts, it's mainly about Quill cleaning up the mess he made. It's something we'll see time and time again with this story. Very little of Guardian's main plot is given over to fluff. Almost everything has a purpose in the endgame, be it Drax's obsession with Fin Fang Foom, Mantis's inclusion, or Lady Hellbender's castle. What's a shame though is the wet fart that our tutorial chapter ends on. After collecting Cammy the Space Llama, the monster we came here to hunt, all signs point towards a bombastic boss fight to put a button on our learning, and the game blue balls us when the Acanti looms down over the Guardians. We get a hero shot, a health bar, a boss title, but instead of letting us chew on it, the game literally bats the Acanti out of the way before chucking us into a light-hearted flying section in the Milano. It's a perfect example of how some of the game's jokes don't land. This bait and switch is all in the service to a punchline of how easy this monster is wiped out. Ha ha, very funny, but it still doesn't mean I'm not disappointed that you robbed me of a fun looking boss fight, Eidos. And if Guardians had good boss fights, it wouldn't matter nearly as much, but as we're going to learn, that's simply not the case.
I don't need a plan B, I got this.
No, you do not got this, pirate. I got this. Now fall in line.
With the Guardians being arrested by the Nova Corps, let's talk about our new blue-skinned friends. Corel and Nikki Gold represent just two of the ways Eidos have played with comic book lore. In fact, Corel would barely quantify a minor character, having only appeared in 3 issues, Nova's 4, 5, and 6. She died as quickly as she was brought to life on the page, stabbed in the back by Gamora while brainwashed by the Phalanx hive mind. Look, it's a whole thing, super depressing, doesn't matter that much, but what does matter is that in the comics, she doesn't have titlights. In contrast, calling Nicolette Gold a minor character in Marvel's history feels unfair, especially considering she joined up with the Guardians of the Galaxy a few months before Star-Lord even existed. But she's hardly ever been a big player, even in stories which feature her. She's got nothing to do with the Nova Corps, Corel never becomes her adopted mother, and she and Star-Lord have never been in the same room as each other, mainly because she's from a different universe. But to the Guardians game, these two are pivotal, concrete characters. Eidos have clearly taken a leaf out of James Gunn's approach to adapting intergalactic life. Make the most out of tertiary characters who have the most potential. Peter and Corel got together during the Galactic War, and it's clear they still harbour feelings for each other. Nikki's relationship with Peter and her mother is a foundation for a lot of the game's emotional beats and themes. We give ourselves over to half an hour of quality daddy-daughter time when Peter saves her life, so that both have space to breathe and bounce off of each other, and it also offers a great opportunity for us to mold what our Peter is like. This whole explorative section is filled with choice-based dialogue to let us choose Peter's attitude to the Nova Corps, how he remembers the Galactic War, and how forgiving he is of a child's naivety when it gets in his way. It also uses the player's expectations against them. I don't know if I was alone, but I felt so smart muscling through the debris with Nikki, assessing her language, her mannerisms, how easily she and Peter got along, how keen she was to get us alone, how Corel gave her the Chewbacca figure to link the two of them together. I was certain I had it all figured out that she was our daughter, and that I was 10 steps ahead of the game. So when it was revealed that Nikki wasn't Quill's kid, and that her refugee status was more similar to her comic book origins than I expected, it threw me. And most effectively of all, I was disappointed, just like Peter ends up being. But even if Nikki isn't our biological daughter, confronting Peter so early on with the concept of fatherhood puts a neat pin on what we've learned about him so far. Daddy Quill is a unique dimension to give our roguish leader. It's not something we've seen explored before. Sure, in the comics it was recently revealed that Peter has a son, Rocky, and he's grown to be more gruff and moody as a result, classic dad stuff, but we haven't seen him be fatherly. We haven't seen him wrestle with what kind of parent he might be, and to my delight, the Guardians game does just this. But we're not there yet.
And after all this time, you haven't changed. At all. You're still the same.
I've changed. Whatever the fine is, I'll pay. Just give me 3 cycles. Let me prove that I'm not still whatever it is you're gonna finish that sentence with.
Prior to the Nova Corps picking us up, we're faced with our first real choice, whether to let the Space Police find Cammy the Llama or Rocket's tech. If you pick the former, the team are fined 8,000 units. The latter means a slightly easier to swallow 7,000. The gang are naturally flarked off about this, and Peter's leadership is called into question. The status quo is officially set, and we have our overarching plotline. Gather some money in 3 cycles, or everyone goes to prison. Relatively small stakes, which neatly snowball as the story gets larger. So, with the team setting off for Lady Hellbender's castle and beginning to develop a con for the ages, let's talk about the exploration and level design.
$37 units?
We appear to be 7,963 units short.
If we intend to keep our ship, Peter Quill.
I know. We clearly Need a plan.
This scene, where the Guardians debate who to sell to Lady Hellbender, has been run into the dust by the game's marketing team, but it doesn't make it any less compelling in the context of the story. On my first playthrough, I immediately went with Rocket, believing that Drax's idea would work because he's clearly a big Hellbender aficionado.
You say the weather patterns of Seknarf 9 are tied to the temperament of its ruler.
That's not how women work.
Or weather.
Yeah, my bad, but our time on Seknarf 9 is where the game's exploration elements get fleshed out a little more, so it does provide the perfect opportunity to discuss that and its level design. Guardians of the Galaxy is more concerned with its level narration than the mechanics of its investigation. The danger of Lady Hellbender is conveyed through the diseased yellows of her planet and the lightning crackling into the fauna. For such a linear experience, the game embraces all of the crazy variety that a galactic adventure offers. Half of this is because of the way colours are used. Seknarf 9's road sign colours are completely different to the popping candy of the Quarantine Zone, which is different from the golden brutalism of the Universal Church of Truth, which is different from the neon wonderment of Nowhere, which is different from the carved ice of Maclu 4. Unique geometry is carved into rock faces. The plant life is unique in every chapter. There are no copied assets from planet to planet, and the game is clearly proud of this fact because Groot's room on the Milano shows off these different assets when you return to it after an expedition. From a visual perspective, each chapter looks completely different from the one that came before it, but there's enough of a switch up in what happens on each planet to keep them feeling distinct as well. Seknarf 9 opens with us needing to shield ourselves from the storm while making perilous jumps. Lady Hellbender's castle itself forces us to contend with enemies and traps, rather than just arena fights. The Quarantine Zone is glossed over with the shooting competition between Peter and Rocket. The Nova Corps ship puts us in zero gravity for a short flying section. Movement, however, is kinda where the gameplay falls behind the world design. Generally, each planet is broken up into bite-sized chunks, so I understand why Quill hasn't been given a sprint button. The distance from set piece to set piece isn't that great, and that distance is broken up further by environmental puzzles, so taking it slow and steady ensures you drink in the atmosphere and get to hear as much of the chatter as possible. This makes sense, considering the Guardians interacting with each other is the real star of the show here, but there are moments where jogging from one end of a room or corridor to another feels a little laborious without the option to speed Peter up, and it can become frustrating. This is minor, but what isn't is Peter's jump. For a guy famous for flying around on jet boots, he couldn't feel more unsatisfying to control during platforming. It's a similar issue I had with Kena Bridge of Spirits, where there doesn't seem to be any momentum behind moving vertically. Rather than moving up and forwards at the speed and angle we'd expect, Peter shoots into the air, and not with the power we see in certain story beats. It really feels like a lot of the jumps the game claims Peter can't make, he absolutely could if his jet boots worked the same way in gameplay as they do in cutscenes. And being halted in our tracks mid-air made platforming groan-worthy where it ought to be exciting. All of this could be solved if we got a mid-air dash. This would add a level of speed to Star-Lord which is sorely missing, and it would offer up opportunities to make the platforming more complex without feeling forced. Guardians is a one-trick Sleipnir when it comes to Quill's traversal. Jump on a platform, jump to the next platform. Occasionally, a jump is too big, so we need to mash a QTE while Quill scrambles up the side of a cliff. Or maybe we need to push up on the left analog stick so he can shimmy along a ledge, or through those loading screen covers that Marvel's Avengers use twice as much. It's a problem we'll explore further in combat. Quill seems to be stripped of basic game character functions to make the other Guardians more necessary to the moment-to-moment decision-making. Because Star-Lord is missing a dash, we need to ask Groot to spread his roots across chasms so we can walk over them. But the Star-Lord given to us in the story could absolutely make these jumps, so it often just feels annoying when we see these gaps rather than thoughtful or clever. I probably wouldn't even feel as strongly about this as I do, except Quill is so much more nimble during a fight than he is hopping about a planet. Here, we get a mid-air dash. Here, he can fly up to survey the area, and segregating Quill's movement between a jumpy bit and a combat bit means he feels like a character of two halves, arbitrarily losing his agility because the game calls for it.
Mind telling us what happened?
I don't know. My blast is I've only done that once before when I was a kid. I don't do it on purpose.
Ah, and then there's the elemental guns, which at least add more detail to the puzzle solving. During 4 scripted moments in the game, Peter will gain a new ability through his guns: ice, wind, lightning, and plasma. I love these in battle, but when it comes to puzzle solving, I love the idea behind these more than the execution. There's so much more potential here for the game to give us some creative obstacles to overcome with them, but the reality is much more basic than this. We use ice to freeze waterfalls, so there's another platform to horribly jump on. Lightning is to charge up electrical panels, plasma melts ice, and wind is to pull apart obstacles. No, not that obstacle, you're not allowed. Bad player, stop being creative. Here, have a shiny green handle, that's better. Pull that. The elements are eked out to us over the course of 15 hours, and they always feel like they just missed the mark with the pacing of the game. They never felt like they arrived at the right time, they always felt like they were too little, too late. There's a lot of room for growth here, especially if there's a sequel where perhaps we could have the elements speak to each other to solve certain puzzles. Something as simple as needing to freeze a block of ice and using wind to pull it closer to us would go a long way in keeping the puzzle solving feeling engaging. The abilities that the rest of the team have add a bit more gravitas to finding our way across a planet. By accounting for their unique characteristics and making them relevant to the gameplay, they feel more and more like a cohesive team the longer you keep using them. But similarly to the elemental weapons, they often feel contextual. Despite having the ability to leap high into the air and use herself as an anchor, Gamora can only do this on certain, clearly defined surfaces at specific moments. Drax can lift or knock over pretty much anything heavy when the game says he can. It's that segregation returning again, and it means that puzzles feel less interesting and more like pin the tail on the donkey by the halfway mark. Enter a room, look for the signs. Is there a scratched wall? Cool, Gamora needs to go there. Is there a translucent outline of a platform? Okay, Groot goes there. This barely bruises the experience, I'll admit. It's more of a disappointment when you realize how shallow these puzzles truly are, but what is bruising is the visor.
You should be able to see the grid with your visor. So, how do we get across?
Peter's the one with the visor. Use your visor, Peter!
Now, I'm sorry, but while I'm meditatively ranting, the visor should have been cut altogether. Its greatest sin is that any time the game throws the Guardians an obstacle, one of the team will immediately pipe up that we need to use our magic visor to figure out the solution, robbing us of any chance to truly think for ourselves. The lore information it provides isn't interesting and barely useful, and it never ever tells us anything we don't already know just from looking around. Activating it highlights interactive objects in the environment. Interactive objects, which we can already see, are interactive because they look just like every other clearly signposted puzzle solution in the rest of the game. And to add insult to injury, sometimes Guardians doesn't even let us interact with those objects until we scan them as well. So even if I know the solution to a puzzle immediately because the puzzles aren't really puzzles, let's face it, I need to equip the visor and scan the object before I can offer up the solution that I immediately knew just by looking at it.
It is time
Here it comes.
for Peter Quill's mask to guide us with its mysterious...
Shut up, Drax, I know! And the worst thing about the visor, the absolute categorical bottom of the barrel worst part of this whole mechanic, is that it's the vehicle for line puzzles. For long-time subscribers, remember my Watch Dogs Legion critique when I said this? I would rather do every single Spider-Man Signs puzzle in a oneer than do another goddamn line puzzle. Now, I don't know who I flarked off in the games industry to make these a returning staple in AAA titles, but at a handful of moments in the game, we need to activate our visor so we can see a bunch of adjoining lines in the environment. Shooting at nodes will turn them so we can live out our space fantasy of following the lines and undertaking a second-grade science experiment while we're trying to have fun. There's so much creativity in the world building and the level narration and the characterization that seeing drivel out of the Ubisoft playbook in an Eidos Montreal game was really heartbreaking. Thankfully, they only appear half a dozen times in the whole game, rather than Watch Dogs Legion's 7,000.
Lady Hellbender, I can see by the size of your weapon that you must be a skillful warrior.
Perhaps I can give you a demonstration sometime.
Okay, first things first, let's get this right out of the way now. There is a new big lady in town and her name is Marguerite Hellbender. The player's time with the warrior queen changes quite drastically depending on whether we try to sell Rocket or Groot, but regardless of which choice we make, she stays true to her roots. Her devotion for beasts as well as her unwavering horniness for big strong men are both what's mainly on show here, with her clear interest in Drax. However, in the Groot path, we see how the Destroyer is still clearly in mourning, unable to move on from the death of his wife, and despite his obvious crush on Hellbender, he turns her down. Both pathways strengthen our understanding of Rocket's devotion to Groot, as well as how deeply he holds on to his insecurities. He is willing to wage war against Hellbender, both to reunite with his friend and to show her that he has worth when she insults him. The Groot path leads to a short stealth section with a line puzzle, and the other has the team shoot their way out, looting Hellbender's vault in the process. Regardless of the path you chose, the end result is still the same. We wrong Lady Hellbender and knuckle down for the game's first boss fight, Dweller in Darkness.
Do you know what I did to the last people who thought I was easy prey?
You let him go?
And God, I think this is the only interpretation of a comics character that I hate. And while Dweller in Darkness is hardly a villain I'm gonna go to war over, when you take this guy, a fear lord created to be the embodiment of humanity's collective fear, a blue tentacle face in power armor, and turn him into a giant levitating squid? It's hard not to feel let down by that. Hell, the grey CGI mess we got in Shang-Chi was a better iteration than this, and that thing was one of the weakest parts of that movie.
I can give you a quick preview if you like. Nuncle.
I said one-all. Dweller's boss fight sets the formula that a lot of Guardians boss fights will carry on over the next 10 hours, and if we're talking sequel, this needs to be a priority for improvement. He is an immobile sponge which floats above the team with big slam attacks that we need to dodge while we spam our special moves until it lies down long enough for us to do some real damage. With Lady Hellbender standing above, catcalling us while we run around, it's hard not to wonder why Eidos didn't just bring her down so we could go toe-to-toe with her after such an effective, rage-filled build-up. I understand the desire to bring her back at the end of the game, but I don't think having the Guardians kick her ass more directly would undermine her wrath or her willingness to help us. It's a missed opportunity to really make the most of an interesting villain, rather than have us fight something so forgettable. Hellbender's Fortress is one of the game's strongest moments, bringing together the best that the gameplay, the world building, and the writing have to offer, and it deserved a better finale than this. Lucky for us, with the money in hand to settle our debt to the Nova Corps, the game is about to earn our trust back.
What are they doing to my ship?
Relax, standard Nova Corps procedure. My ship's fine.
Which part?
Ask Will. He's the one who keeps crashing it.
Alright, let's pay that fine.
With the fallout from Seknarf 9 weighing on the team, a clear rift begins to form among the Guardians, especially between Rocket and Quill. Rocket's developing a serious distrust of Peter because of his relationship with Corell and his soft spot for Nikki, and it's starting to chip away at the Guardians' morale. Among thieves, Rocket is the most proud of their criminal past, and this version of him absolutely despises cops. But the Nova Station is quiet. Too quiet. A lengthy navigation through the red, gold, and blue propaganda is brimming with details and tidbits to truly flesh out our understanding of the Nova Corps and how they police the galaxy. Entertaining, compelling world building relies on a few fundamentals: a detailed history, a believable socio-political climate, characters which are immersed in that climate, and flavor text. Take the universe of The Witcher, particularly everyone's favourite Witcher 3. The continent has a rich history of murder, subterfuge, magic, and political usurpation. King Radovid hates mages because his father was assassinated by one, a direct consequence of the Nilfgaardian invasion. When Geralt arrives in Novigrad, it's to the backdrop of angry, paranoid mobs burning potential sorcerers at the stake. None of this directly links to the whereabouts of Ciri, the game's main quest, but it gives the universe some heart and soul while offering up some interesting side quests. Whilst Guardians of the Galaxy isn't The Witcher 3, there's a similar level of depth to the world building, particularly in how it handles its history. At a certain moment in the game, Gamora curses that every corner of the galaxy was touched by war, and we're not allowed to forget it. Prior to the events of the game, the galaxy devolved into widespread fighting which touched the lives of every character we meet. Thanos led the Chitaurian conquest, murdering half of the universe in the process. Each of the Guardians were affected directly by this conquest. Quill signed up and fought against it, meeting Kal-El in the process. Gamora has blood on her hands from fighting for Thanos, but ultimately defected. Groot's whole species was wiped out, leading to his meeting with Rocket. Drax lost his family and hunted Thanos to the ends of space. The war is also directly responsible for the Nova Corps' authoritarian grip on the galaxy, which is why they play such a prominent role in this story. We learn that after they suffered heavy casualties against Thanos, they became more hardened as a force, more focused on self-preservation. When we pick up the Guardians at the start of the game, the galaxy is in ruin, mourning the many lives lost and the destruction unearthed in the wake of that war. All of this history isn't necessary, but God is it welcome. In a weaker narrative, it would be just a passing mention in a collectible somewhere, but the game's senior narrative director, Mary DeMarle, who we can also thank for the writing in Deus Ex Mankind Divided, has gone on the record that she starts her stories with history and builds the main plot from there. In an interview with the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences, she said, "When I started my writing career, I was all about character and emotion. My weak point was plot. Plot tends to be more of a reason thing than an emotional thing. You have to have those beats and the emotion underlines it, cuts it, drives it forward, and makes sense of it. As I've gotten older, I spend a lot of time focusing on making sure that I understand history and then using that to bring in more about the characters. It's not just in the writing that we see this emphasis on history either. You're only a few minutes into the quarantine zone before you see a crashed Nova Corps ship from the war. Nowhere is covered in orphans and refugees. Guardians' world and the Guardians themselves are scarred by Thanos' war, and you can feel its claws digging into each plot beat.
Are these?
Centurion armor! Yup. Feel free to try one on, Quill.
A true warrior requires no armor.
You wouldn't fit in one anyway.
For real? Can I try one?
If you want to get fried to a puddle of goo.
As the Guardians explore the abandoned station, we get lovely little asides. One of them is Star-Lord trying to wear some Nova armor, leading to Rocket explaining that the technology could melt him from the inside. Yum. Another is the appearance of Jack Flag, one of many characters who have briefly travelled across the stars with the team in the comics. He appears, we read his bio, and then we blast him into space, never to be seen again. These are just two examples of how Guardians fleshes out its lore with silly little asides, but this stuff never ever stops until you do. The dialogue isn't just the Guardians bickering or plotting, it's dusted with little sprinkles of exposition that make its universe feel much more fully realised. The relaxation of exploring the Domehead ship doesn't last long, and we're soon locked in a fight for our lives when the Universal Church of Truth finally makes its appearance through the brainwashed Nova Corps. In the comics, the Universal Church of Truth is a religious cult which has tried to spread its presence across the galaxy a few times. The Guardians game stays true to its origins for the most part, but this version of them is more unnerving, I think. It might just be the impact of hearing their doctrine spoken aloud, but I think the visual design does wonders for how we see them. The blocky textures of Sacrosanct are completely different from the more traditional domes comic fans would recognise. It makes them feel more immovable and absolute as a force, especially in contrast to the Guardians' scrappiness. Their inclusion as villains continues to heighten the game's emphasis on its own history. The galaxy is ripe for converting following the war, which makes the Church an even greater threat than they might have already been. Every single planet is reeling from Thanos' conquest, so when we see the vast numbers which turn to the Church and accept the promise, we can completely understand that emotional conflict. Whilst the promise could just as easily be waved away as powerful space magic which brainwashes the masses, it's made more terrifying because we understand why they are so dangerous. What I like most about this fight, though, is how it reinforces Rocket's hatred of the Nova Corps. There isn't even a quiet respect for them like Peter seems to harbour. He is laughing and mocking them as we gun them down, and when the dust finally settles, he wastes no time reminding Quill that his allegiance to Kal-El means that he has an allegiance to the Space Cops. It's here that the rift between Peter and Rocket officially shatters the Guardians. When we finally make it to the Milano and blast off to nowhere, it looks like Rocket and Groot are going to leave us.
What are they doing back there?
Shenanigans, likely.
See you never, flark bags!
and nowhere is my favourite part of the game for all of the reasons we've previously discussed. If the true joy of Guardians is living in this galaxy, getting to experience some downtime in Marvel's coolest spaceport is the cherry on the cake. Our goal here is to make it to Cosmo the Space Dog, the cutest head of security in all of gaming, that's a fact, don't at me, and every corner, every back alley, every shop we can visit has something weird and wonderful to learn about, be it alien foods for Peter to try, or flarking grifters, give me back my unit! The character writing is at its very best here. Meeting Mantis, we learn that Gamora's been harboring suicidal urges since the war ended, that Peter went spacefaring with this guy, Lipless, and his passion for music has rubbed off on his old partner, and that despite the Nova Corps' propaganda, Drax is certain he failed to kill Thanos in the war.
That's why you come up here.
Yes. To feel close to them. Speak to them. Perhaps you think that sounds foolish.
No, not at all.
With the quiet, terrifying beauty of the rift beyond them, Quill and Drax formally bond over the deaths of their loved ones. It's a glimpse into Drax's spiritual side, which undercuts a lot of his motivation in our adventure. His fear that his family in death haven't made it to the Catathian afterlife because of how they died breaks apart that single sentence description of angry, vengeful warrior and makes Drax more meditative and heartbreaking. If we're careful with our words, our Peter is able to ease Drax's pain not with jokes or quips, but with honest vulnerability. And this isn't the only time that the game does this. That's probably one of the more pleasant of surprises I had while playing Guardians. Despite the light-hearted tone and the attempt to keep the momentum fast-paced in most conversations, there's so much downtime that never feels squandered. Every time we return to the Milano, the game takes a deep breath and lets us catch up with our friends to hear how they're feeling, and they're not always for the sake of a gag. Drax reflects on how he treats the other Guardians. Groot reflects on the extinction of his people. Rocket tells us all about his old partner who he got killed. And whilst this is a sillier example, Gamora offers up a chance to sing an Earth song with her just to cheer her up. But my favourite thing about Nowhere is that it gives me a great opportunity to talk about flavor text.
The letters, the notes that are written around are not terribly interesting. Where, not that they're not interesting, they don't feel very relevant. Like, who are they teaching me about? Is it important?
See, I like Alana Pierce, but you'd think someone involved with God of War's writing would know the importance of world building. Whilst Guardians makes a concerted effort to make even its tertiary characters relevant and important, it is littered with random, unimportant fluff that strengthens the believability of its lore. These articles and letters we can find while exploring extrapolate on stories and creatures that we'll never meet and likely will never hear from again, with the single exception of this letter referring directly to Adam Warlock. The Collector's Emporium is an interactive museum where we get to flesh out more of the goings-on of the galaxy. One ticket earns you time among relics from Marvel's past, like the Watcher's Eye that Nick Fury cut out, or Throg, the Frog of Thunder, silently raging in his tube. There's enough in here to fuel years of sequels to come, but as we wander around and ogle the Collector's jars, it's easy to see that Guardians surpasses the greatest rule of world building, that the world can exist separately from the player. Whilst the Guardians save the galaxy and we interact with the various oddities we meet, there's so much that Eidos have included that we only really get a sniff of. Richard Ryder is missing, having cut himself off from the world mind. Why? Where is he? We never learn this, and we don't need to. It's there just to add flavour. Yondu is rotting in the kiln. He never makes an appearance, never impacts the story, but Mary DeMarle has fleshed out a history for him despite being off-screen.
Look at what we got here. Watch it, Star-Lord. And what's a filthy scut-stained Terran doing out here, Rosen? Hiding's what I think, Garrick.
Now, Garrick and Rawson, the Blood Brothers, are not an example of flavor text, but they are yet another example of how little of the player's time the game wastes. They are our second boss fight, one of the bounty hunters sent after us by Lady Hellbender after we killed her big squid. Pacing-wise, they're here so that Hellbender doesn't fade from the player's consciousness. The game is beginning to take great strides away from the small stakes of conning the Monster Queen to the grander consequences of the Universal Church of Truth. They're also here for two other reasons. The first is to show how useless Quill is without the rest of his team. He can't put a dent in the brothers with his pea shooters. The second is to reunite the Guardians after their rough breakup. While Rocket and Groot don't join the fray, we see Drax and Gamora's friendship begin to strengthen. If for nothing else, the team is united by their affection for Peter. Our two bloodthirsty pals begin to soften with each other as we take down the brothers, and it helps us trace the growth of the team.
Grand Unifier Raker, leader of the Universal Church of Truths. That name rings bells for Cosmo. His old cult. Very powerful during Galactic War. Now, not so much.
However, relationships aren't totally repaired as we wake up in Cosmo's jail. Our time with the space dog isn't quite as fluid as the other scenes, it's just one big fat exposition dump where the Guardians learn about the Universal Church of Truth and Grand Unifier Raker's leadership role. The blow is softened by the inclusion of puppers though. That's hardly deep analysis, but Eidos understand their audience. If you're going to chuck a scene full of exposition at us, you might as well cover it with dogs. Where the Guardians start off as thieves for hire on the wrong side of the law, Cosmo signifies the halfway mark of their growth into heroes. We are, in every sense, agents now hired by Cosmo, sent off on a recon mission through the goddamn Continuum Cortex to learn more about the Universal Church of Truth. What's that? The massive transdimensional hand carrying them off planet isn't cool enough for you? Fine, okay, here, have Thanos.
I know that sound.
Have Spider-Man.
Is that Earth?
Have the event. Oh no, okay. Thanks for the reminder, Guardians. Don't mind me, I was just enjoying myself. I guess that means this is the part of the video where I've got to talk about that other game, right?
Yeah, talk about it.
Yeah, okay. The next couple of hours follow the Guardians as they explore Hala's Hope in search of Karel. They fight more cultists, are introduced to the Lethal Legion through the Nova Corps' database, and learn that Karel was engulfed by Magus after she found the Infinity Stone that Peter and Rocket released in the quarantine zone. Luckily for us, or unluckily depending on how you see it, returning to these familiar environments offers an opportunity to talk about Square Enix's other Marvel property. I am well aware that a year ago I covered Avengers in detail, and the link to that critique is on screen now, but it's worth returning to because, as I said at the start of this video, the failure of Marvel's Avengers has had a real detrimental impact on the amount of players who picked up Guardians, and that is a damn shame. With a full year passing since Avengers splurged onto our screens, the criticism for it seems to have softened. I've seen reviewers I truly respect refer to the game as being of two halves, and that while the live service bullscut continues to be poisonous drivel, the single player campaign was actually quite good if you think about it. This is wrong. Avengers campaign had a lot of problems, and only a couple of them could be blamed on it being a live service, but that's as suitable a place to start as any because so much crap has happened since I originally talked about this game. I might as well throw in my 2 cents. First, let's talk about this.
So our promise to the community is that we won't have random loot boxes or pay-to-win scenarios.
Yeah, so that was a flarking lie, and because I'm right about everything all the time always, guess who called it? What I didn't call was a month after Crystal Dynamics introduced paid XP boosters to its game, it would backpedal because of the vitriol tossed their way by its waning fanbase. Clearly the monetary value didn't outweigh the backlash they received, and on November 2nd, we got this half-arsed apology pumped onto their Twitter. We apologise for not responding sooner to your concerns about the addition of paid consumables in the marketplace. We introduced them as an option for an evolving player base and did not see them as pay to win since they don't offer power directly. Hey, Crystal Dynamics, if spending money on making your character stronger isn't pay to win, what is pay to win to you? And just to be clear, for those of you who are praising the developer for changing their mind and scrapping the XP boosters, vomiting on the floor, waiting a month, and then coming back to clean up the vomit still means you vomited on the floor. This isn't deserving of your praise. It's no wonder the player base feel completely let down by the Spider-Man reveal, considering he was marketed a year ago as bringing an expansion with a fully fleshed story, but what we're getting instead is a hero event, a brand new, meaningless term that we haven't heard before, used purely so that Crystal Dynamics can hide behind it when we realise just how underwhelming it is. And while this will date the video, Mark my words, he will be underwhelming. Editor's note, this reminds me to let you all know that I'm now going to call all future critiques video moments. Editor's note on the editor's note, the plan has now changed. The video moments are now being rebranded as righty long longs. Thank you. We all seem to forget that the live service model wasn't this embarrassing wart on the arse of the game. It wasn't the other half of Marvel's Avengers. It was integrated directly with the single player campaign. Kamala Khan's adventure is interrupted twice for a total of about an hour of this 7-hour story so that the game can force the player to trundle about the Chimera or the Anthill and speak to vendors, having cosmetics marketed to us during the story. At one point, we are forced to go and grind in the live service strike missions while we wait for Jarvis to figure out where Tony Stark is. This is the game forcing us to engage with the live service stuff whether we want to or not. When Guardians of the Galaxy slows us down, it's all in the name of story and character growth. At no point are we forced to mumble about the Milano listening to how awesome it would be if whoever's controlling Peter Quill would fork out for a new skin. Instead, it's for stuff like this.
What does that last line mean, Drax?
Soltat Flander Gath. It means we will be victorious.
And speaking of the game forcing this down your throat, we're still waiting for it to pay off after a full year. Avengers touted that it would have a narrative-driven live service, but to date, there's been nothing narratively driving the Kree invasion or the Nick Fury plot. Remember those? Fury goes missing and has shield vaults pockmarked across the globe like acne scars, and the game regularly pops up with reminders that, hey, maybe we should go and find more of Nick Fury's vaults. Maybe if we get them all, we'll find out where he is. Do it, go on, do it. You know you want to, do it. Structurally, this would be the equivalent of Guardians of the Galaxy devoting an entire chapter searching for Richard Rider on an asteroid just to stuff their hands in their pockets to the end, shrug and fly away. After all of this crap with Nick Fury, what did the live service offer up as an answer to this mystery? Incoherent gobbledygook. He was captured by AIM and then went into the future to help Monica's future self protect Earth against the Kree, but if time travel creates two Monicas, a future Monica and a past Monica, there should be two Nick Furies as well. So even after all this bullscut, the question remains, where is Nick Fury, and why are we still fighting aimbots when we've had a year of aliens being teased? There still hasn't been any Thor content after the game's release, meaning he still only has narrative value for a total of 15 minutes. What's Loki up to? One of the live service missions set up that whole thing, but it looks like Avengers just wants us to forget about it, I guess. In complete contrast, every chapter in Guardians ties into the overall adventure. Even Cammy, the space llama, just here for a punchline, has a plot point later on. I'm not done, but let's take a moment to catch up with the Guardians.
You came here seeking truth. Rejoice. The matriarch wishes to share it with you.
High above Contraxia, the Universal Church of Truth's faith drill drains the energy of the planet's population and helps to gift Rocket some much-needed likability points. His fury at Quill, and by extension the player, can easily become quite grating without regular reminders that Rocket has a heart as big as the rest of the Guardians, and stuff that he truly really cares about deep down. We are often reminded of how integral he is to this team. He's what keeps the Milano ticking over, with 2 of the ship's rooms given over to reinforcing just this fact, and it's easy to see sometimes that the rest of the Guardians can kind of take his technical wizardry for granted. It's also here that the team come face to face with our big bad, grand unifier Raker. We caught a glimpse of him earlier when the Nova Corps arrested us, but this is him in his prime, and he chews the scenery. I love that the player is met with a challenge while Raker rambles about the church's work and the tangibility of faith energy. We need to keep him talking long enough for Rocket to hack his cube drone thingy, playing with the superhero trope of an honest-to-God villain monologue by making us encourage our baddie to keep chatting. Ironically, all the evidence you need that Guardian's character writing is stronger than Marvel's Avengers happens through Rocket and Quill's fallout. This whole section on Hala's Hope simulates how adrift the two friends have become through the gameplay. Rocket doesn't follow our instructions as willingly as he did in the early game, meaning we need to tell him what to do a couple of times before he reluctantly hacks a door or climbs into a vent. The two are at each other's throats for a full third of Guardian's runtime, from the end of Chapter 2 right up to the end of Chapter 7, and there are peaks and valleys that we can trace to make their arguing more believable. At the start of this section, each of them communicate by speaking through Gamora, and whilst it's funny, mainly because of the delivery, it's also frustrating. This means when the team eventually come together and bond, there is a real sense of catharsis. On the other hand, Avengers rushes through its characterization like it's trying to race home for dinner. In the base game, Tony Stark and Bruce Banner are smacking each other upside the head 1 minute, and then 2 minutes later they're reminiscing about the good old days. In the Kate Bishop expansion, it's hard to even see the outline of a character arc for the Archer. What is she supposed to learn about while hunting for Clint? Is she a lone ranger or a team player? Who knows? She barely gets a second to catch her breath between the waves of aimbots and stream of bugs.
I take my video games very seriously.
Guardians, despite primarily being a character study of our team, is even able to pull off a pretty satisfying twist when we learn the identity of the matriarch. All signs have pointed towards Corel. We see Magus engulf her just moments before, and when we ask the brainwashed Nova about her, they play coy, but to my honest shock, it wasn't Corel in the robe, but Nikki. It's testament to just how compelling the writing is that I didn't even mind how lengthy this cutscene was. It clocks in at a solid 15 minutes before we gain control of Quill's legs again, offering the player dialogue options to keep up the pace. This shakes the Guardians to their core. No time for jokes or japes, making the scene feel tonally unnerving. Quill tries to keep things light by referring to Nikki's youth again, still referring to her as kid, not quite ready to embrace his role as a father, despite finding evidence that he could be. Nikki's sincere acceptance of the church and so-called promise that they preach is chilling because none of this is played for giggles. Here, at the halfway point, the game earnestly portrays the church as something to be feared, and just as we're adjusting to this change in tone, the game throws us another curveball. I've avoided discussing the flashback so far, but at a few points in the story, Peter's mind is cast back to the past, to the day of his birthday, the day his mother was murdered. We're gradually taught about the kind of person his mother was, and we're encouraged to adore her the same way Peter adored her. These increase after Peter meets Nikki, the potential of parenthood reminding him more and more of the type of parenting he knew growing up, but seeing the promise of happiness Quill envisions makes him feel so wholesome. To Peter, an idyllic life doesn't just stop after he saves his mother from the Chitauri, it's a life where he can be with his mother and the Guardians, bringing them home so they can all live in peace together. And if you're not able to struggle for Meredith, if you make the wrong choice, Magus bleeds in over the screen, cutting the player off from Peter, locking him in this paradise that he dreams of. In the most twisted moment of all, the only way to escape from Peter's promise is to have him kill his mother, a visual representation of the guilt he carries. Throwing him sideways into Nikki's promise, where she has a happy home life with Daddy Quill and Mummy Corel, is absolutely heart-wrenching and puts her obsession with Peter into full context. Corel died, and when Magus engulfed her, Nikki was in grief, unable to move on from losing her adopted mother and desperate for Peter to take her under his wing.
She has to accept my death. She must. Show her how to let me go. Free my daughter. Save her.
The thing I love most about this story is that it doesn't just rest on its laurels. It would have been all too easy to regurgitate the same old team story we've seen time and time again, pulling a message out of a virtual garbage can that we're stronger together and leaving it at that. Staying on point, this is exactly what Avengers does. They disassemble, and then Kamala's earnestness reminds them that the only way they can take down the big bad is by working as a team. It's stale. Guardians treads this tried and true territory as well, but it doesn't stop there like Avengers does. In fact, it has a whole other theme that it's more concerned with, but we'll get to that shortly. Spoilers. For now, the game uses the Universal Church of Truth and its promise power to reflect the Guardians' individual issues back at them. It all feels interconnected and purposeful. We never get to directly see what Nikki showed the rest of the team, but whatever it was has them reeling. Old wounds start to bleed as a result of this. Gamora sees a lot of Nikki's fate in her own. Rocket is seriously scared by the church, willing to abandon Nikki in order to save his own skin, and once we escape Sacrosanct and make it back to the Milano, Drax, after accidentally calling Gamora by his wife's name during gameplay, completely shuts down, locking himself in his room and not speaking to anyone. It's primarily in the structure of this game that we see Marvel's Avengers' greatest sin. With one exception in the form of an Iron Man flying mission, Avengers has one gameplay loop, running from arena fight to arena fight, because all of the game's creativity is at the behest of setting up the live service missions to trudge through. On the flip side, Guardians has puzzles to solve, nowhere to explore, a section where you need to sing to a llama to get it to unlock a door. When arena fights do happen, there's often a natural sense of verticality to them, with obstacles to dodge around or climb over. There's location variety which stops the story from feeling trite, be it hunting for a dragon on Maklu 4, a mind battle with Thanos and Drax's subconscious, or hell, a space battle with Captain Glory. Oh yeah, if you've played the game, you'll definitely remember Captain Glory. The gang decide to head to Xandar to ask the Nova Corps Worldmind for help against the Church, but before they can set off, they are very rudely interrupted. He's the second bounty hunter Lady Hellbender sends after us. Prior to this moment, we have a couple of missions where we need to fly through space rubble and crashing spaceships. These sections are fun, but without this boss fight against Glory and the Lethal Legion, they would feel pretty gimmicky. Thankfully, our time battling Glory helps to cauterize everything we've learned from those previous arcadey moments. The space combat doesn't have much in the way of depth. There's no cooldown on our weapons, no means of attack other than our standard blasters. It's more about dodging his bombs than anything else. And whilst it's light fluff with very little depth, it's here to break up the monotony after muscling through waves and waves of goons to escape Sacrosanct.
We did not make this decision without considering all available options. A complete search of our databanks only revealed a single entity with the potential to stop them.
What is it?
Not what, who. Adam Warlock.
The Worldmind, much like its comic book counterpart, sucks. In the comics, it's comprised of the actual brains of deceased Xandarians, and it's a great sign of how intelligent yet inept a full population's consciousness would be when combined. Richard Ryder, the hero Nova, cut himself off from them, and no wonder. If you had this thing giving you orders all day, I'd chuck my helmet in a black hole too. Where Guardians doubles down on the bureaucratic space cop vibe, the Worldmind is the proof in the pudding. It will only speak to us if we select the option to pay a fine, and what we're met with is a great section where we need to try and convince it to help us. Even if we are able to talk the Worldmind round, our time with it is morally draining to the team. The fact they couldn't save Nikki, the confrontation of their personal traumas, and witnessing the Church brainwash refugee ships means that the Guardians are at the end of their tether. For the second and thankfully last time in the game, they break down. Talk about an all is lost moment, and it's about to get worse.
Drax. We talked about this, man. You gotta stop.
Your illegitimate child was correct, Peter Quill. Hovat and Chimeria will be restored.
Yeah, okay.
We just need to have faith.
Due to his intense spirituality, Drax is clearly the most likely to be brainwashed by the Church's promise. We're reminded time and time again in the first half of the game how keenly he missed his wife and daughter, and he'd do anything to get them back. It's easy to see that Quill has developed a real bromance with Drax by this point. With the conversation on Nowhere, the more reflective interactions we can have aboard the Milano, his genuine personalised support during combat, the game cultivates an affection between the two which rises a little higher than the rest of the Guardians. So it broke my heart to see him twist into this shell of his former self, landing the Milano on Lamentis so he can get his hands on Mantis.
Mantis?
How did you...
What? Oh, that? Lysa once taught me the art of striking one spot and many times.
Of course, he grossly underestimates Mantis, and she quickly kicks his ass before temporarily joining the team. She takes control of Drax and guides us through Lamentis to a cave which should help snap him out of the promise. I love that despite just playing as Quill, the team of the Guardians expands and retracts over the course of our space adventure. While Drax, Peter, Rocket, Groot and Gamora remain steadfast and consistent members from Chapter 1 right through to Chapter 16, we are joined by Mantis, Adam Warlock and Nikki Gold before the credits roll, presenting the Guardians as this fluid, malleable team of heroes, just like they are in the comics. Lamentis also has a creepy mist which forces the Guardians to battle a lot of the enemies we've encountered in previous chapters, which naturally offers up the perfect chance to talk about combat. Guardians combat is far from the deepest gameplay in the galaxy, but it just doesn't outstay its welcome, primarily because of the variety. The game regularly employs fun little gimmicks to the context of fights to keep them feeling fresh. On Hala's Hope, we need to use the Guardians to hold off the Nova Corps while we release the Milano from clamps holding it. On Sacrosanct, there's a section where we're travelling on a levitating platform, shooting the Scut out of the cult while Rocket tries to carry us over a congregation. On Lamentus, there's a fun section where we get to choose which enemies we battle. None of these sequences are ever regurgitated, none of them feel forced, like for example, standing in a control point while a bar goes up. Speaking of enemies, the game boasts a metric crap ton across its 15 hours. Different factions, different races, different creatures with different movesets, and some of them are only on screen for a couple of fights, but generally we can break them down into 3 camps. Gunner enemies, which blast at us from a distance and sometimes hang out on unreachable cliffs. Space critters, more concentrated on speed than real damage. And brutes, which hit hard, can barely be scratched because of their stagger meters, and are a pain to take down. The difference between these goons is pretty negligible. I'm sure nobody watching this video could tell me what separates a rock monster from a Wendigo when it comes to combat. Their moves and health are pretty much the same. The real variety comes from when the game chucks a couple of mini-bosses into the mix. The church droids are huge sponges which hit hard and have a robust stagger meter. With most enemies, the stagger meter can often be ignored. Typically, special attacks water down the health bar so much that staggering them doesn't factor into your strategy much, like say the lizard creatures on Seknarf 9. They reveal a weak spot on their bellies if you can stagger them enough, but that weak spot isn't that weak, whereas if you stagger the droids, you can send Gamora or Groot in to rip their arms off for major damage. The church wizards are the biggest pain in the game, forcing the player to prioritize them in battle because they can quickly heal some of their friends. Guardians doesn't offer much in the form of real challenge, but the rare times the player does die, these guys are regularly involved. The Nova jetpack crew fly around the map, swiftly dodging our special moves. What makes them unique is they are the only character in the game which requires Star-Lord to take them down. We need to ground them by blasting their jetpack so the other Guardians can get a look in, which is awesome, but I wish there was another enemy which forced this as well, because for the most part, we are constantly reminded that Quill is the weakest Guardian.
Oh, this is the one where you inspire them.
Just think about who we were when we started.
Well, you were a 2-bit broke pirate who couldn't even outrun a tree.
Exactly! And you were a 2-bit bounty hunter.
Keeping evil copies of ourselves at bay helps the game show off how different and unique each of the Guardians feel to each other. It's just a shame that we're playing as the worst one. What's impressive is how distinct their abilities are. Groot ties enemies down, teeing them up for a follow-up. Gamora deals a lot of damage to individual enemies, but isn't very strong against those with high stagger meters. Rocket's all about area of effect attacks, using grenades to blow up a few enemies at once, or wrap them all together in mid-air. Drax specializes in reducing stagger. Quill can quickly get rid of enemy shields. There's a Guardian for every situation. The only problem is we are playing as the Guardian with the least cool contribution. I completely understand why Eidos made us fight as Quill. The idea is that our primary purpose on the battlefield is to be a leader, to survey our foes, strategize, and send the Guardians in to work their magic, but it doesn't necessarily work as intended. The Guardians inevitably have a cooldown after use, so once you use them all up, it feels like you're just running around killing time until they're ready to do some damage again. And what we're encouraged to do during that runaround time is blast at enemies with our pea shooters. There is a level of depth to Quill's guns. 2 quick jabs on the trigger buttons opens up a slightly more powerful blast. If they overheat, we get the chance to time a stronger shot to do a little more damage. Enemy shields have particular weaknesses to Quill's 4 elements. Some are downed with electricity, others to ice, but this is only communicated to the player through logos popping up above enemies' heads, rather than intuitively being communicated. You'd expect that perhaps the church droids can be overloaded with electricity because they're robots, so imagine my shock when some of them were arbitrarily weak to ice or weak to plasma. It's not that our combat is shallow though, that's not the right word for it. On a PlayStation controller you will use every single button in a single fight. The directional buttons control the elements, the triggers are for shooting or bringing up the Guardian's wheel, Peter's own ability wheel is clunkily mapped to the L3 stick, X gives us a jump, circle a dash, triangle opens environmental attacks, and the square button is for melee. And Peter's melee looks cooler than it feels. There's a magnetic pull to nearby enemies, so you can just embrace the mindless fun of his somersaults and the crunch of the elemental guns. Mixing a dash with a punch increases its power, and occasionally little QTEs will interrupt straight punching, so you don't get too lackadaisical. Of course, we need to talk about the astonishing accessibility features available. Guardians isn't limited to 4 difficulty modes, though they are there if a player wants to embrace the intended experience. We can customize everything from Quill's damage output to how quickly we regenerate our shield to how much an elemental shot costs, which means that a lot of my criticisms about how Quill controls are mitigated by the fact that I can, at any point, jump into this menu and tweak those controls. If I'm frustrated that enemies feel too spongy because Quill's gunshots feel too weak, screw it, I can pat myself into this menu and up his damage, making him feel much, much stronger. Yes, being magnetically pulled to an enemy with the push of the square button doesn't require much thought. Yes, using a Guardian ability just teleports them to the enemy you want to use them on. Yes, there is not realistic depth or difficulty, but Guardian's story is the priority, and the combat is only here to act as a fun, meaningless distraction. And while that does not undermine that muddled nature of the combat, fun in the most arcadey sense of the word it can be. Star-Lord's mindless blasting is contrasted by the surprise and joy I felt when I turned a jelly monster to ice and then unlocked the option for Drax to pick up that ice cube and lob it at other enemies in the room. The huddle system has all the depth of an ashtray on a rainy day, but the results of that system just scream fun factor.
Long have I craved to win a battle like this, Peter Quill. Order the others to stand down so that I may finish it alone.
During fights, Star-Lord unlocks the ability to summon the Guardians for a team huddle. The Guardians spout off about how good or bad the fight is going, arguing with each other, complimenting each other, and we need to pay attention to what they say, choose the right response for a motivational speech, and enjoy the results if we get it right. This idea is awesome. It gives the Guardians a damage buff afterwards and a rapid quick cooldown on their abilities, so the team can rain down on any baddies stupid enough to get in their way. However, considering how regularly the huddle system pops up in the game, there simply isn't enough dialogue that's been pulled into it to keep the mechanics of the system entertaining after the 10th go around. I think I heard Gamora say, "I never thought I'd say this, but fighting with you guys is fun," at least 3 times over the course of the game, as if she's carrying selective amnesia. It is hardly a deal breaker, but it stands out because outside of the huddles, the Guardians hardly ever repeat dialogue. There's always something new and interesting to hear from them. The second issue is that it's almost impossible to fail these. The game makes a bigger deal about their difficulty than is totally necessary, like we need to listen to the whole conversation, judge the tone and the interaction, when in reality, we just need to listen to the last thing said and choose the option which references a keyword in that past sentence. If Rocket says they're painting the arena with the blood of their enemies, we choose the option which has the word paint in it. Some further complexity in what the Guardians say, or hell, even increasing the options for what Quill can respond with, would make the huddle feel as mechanically satisfying as it is audio-visual, because it is satisfying in that respect. Quill's speeches are always stupidly cheesy and wholesome, reinforcing the likability factor of our hero. Sometimes he starts rhyming, other times he's laughing while he gives an inspirational speech, and the result is something as ridiculous and badass as listening to Wham while we fight the Nova Corps, or hearing Don't Worry, Be Happy while we take down Fing Fam Foom. All of this is fun with a big fat capital F. It's just missing a key ingredient that I honestly do think would make the game so much better, but hold that thought, we're about to get to the good stuff.
What wayward wickedness is this?
Nasty uglies from that busted noggin of yours. It's okay, guys, it's him, Aaron Witchcraft. No, wait, Aiden Warsaw. Ashley Warsaw?
Well, almost good. It's beyond me why anyone at Eidos thought introducing Adam Warlock with a fight scene but not having him be a boss fight was a good idea. It's Adam Warlock, the Golden God. Even a short battle with him, all bearded and angry, would have been better than watching the Guardians have all the fun without us. Warlock is referenced a few times across the game, with hints that he's dead pervading much of the story. He was once in the same position Nikki now is, the face of the Universal Church of Truth. This version of Warlock might honestly be my favourite, unless Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 does something interesting with him. The Guardians, the game, and the player all seem to be in on a joke that Warlock isn't. That he's incredibly dull. His obnoxiousness comes through in how he speaks, with rhyming lingo, speaking in big words and being overly loquacious, and adding him to the team, even temporarily, is a great way for them to continue bonding. They can't hate each other more than we all hate Adam Warlock. If Nowhere is my favourite part of the game, Chapter 11, Mind Over Matter, is a very, very close second. Mantis sends the Guardians and Adam Warlock into Drax's mind with the hope that we can collectively unlock him from the control of the Promise. We see Catathian ruins, running through overgrown mazes and sad fog to track him down, seeing what a great husband and father he was in the process. We see how Catathian culture shaped his love of battle, but reminding us that his aggression is always coated in his spirituality. The only downside of this chapter is that it teases us with a serious Thanos boss fight, but what we actually need to contend with are a few brutes reskinned to look like this universe's version of Thanos. They're easy to kill, but duplicate after each death. The true way to win here is to let go, to let Thanos defeat us. Symbolically, this fight works. Drax isn't sure he killed Thanos, that he will return again one day, so of course the rest of the Guardians see this in action by an infinitely respawning Mad Titan. I love that we get to see this universe's iteration of Thanos after hearing so much about him, especially this mocking, inevitable version, but after the Adam Warlock disappointment, this felt like a second kick in the Nords. It's around this time that we start unlocking the ultimate abilities of a few of the Guardians. Earlier on Lamentis, Quill unlocked his by summoning the resolve to stop being a coward, to develop a rigor in his leadership style which the Guardians sorely need, by, in short, growing up. Rocket earns his by overcoming his fear of water, a part of his trauma developed when he was experimented on. Drax gains his at the end of this section in his mind by accepting the deaths of his loved ones. Later, Gamora accepts the Guardians as her new home and comes to terms with the murder of her sister Nebula, but Groot gets the short end of the stick, pun intended. We're jumping ahead for a moment, but Groot achieves his ultimate ability to heal the Guardians during combat by resurrecting Fin Fang Foom, where the story really seems to centre on the character growth of each member of the team in one way or another, overcoming personal traumas. Groot doesn't get the same level of depth and exploration that the rest of the team do. This is a shame and arguably a difficult one to bypass. Because Groot can't communicate in the same way as the others, the direct chats we have with him aboard the Milano devolve into Peter trying to feel his way through conversations with him. It's discussed that the Collector imprisoned him for a full year and that this has had a serious mental impact on him, but he doesn't get the same epiphany that the other Guardians do when he unlocks his final ability, and that's a slight disappointment. The best way to do this would be to have the Guardians journey off to meet the Collector directly, but that would buckle the pacing of the story, only serving for more Easter eggs. It's a catch-22 for Eidos, and I'm glad they're saving the Collector's villain status for a potential sequel. It's just a shame that his later unlock feels a little forced. As for leveling up itself, this is a little more murky. None of the Guardians can strengthen their HP or damage output. There are no complicated skill trees. In fact, bolstering your team is incredibly simple. In battle, we earn experience points. Somehow. After 2 full playthroughs, I'm still kinda unsure on whether or not anything we do has a direct impact on how much XP we earn. There's a style gauge at the side shouting "marvelous" and "fantastic" as we fight enemies. Certain combinations of the Guardian's abilities being given names like the half-world, half-pipe, but there's a lack of clarity in how these are communicated to us. So much of what we do during combat feels clunky, random, and haphazard, and even as I'm writing this, I'm not sure what a half-world, half-pipe even is, or how I achieve it. And this brings me to my most subjective criticism in this critique. I mean, all of my critiques are subjective, obviously, I'm just a guy who's right about everything all the time always. I wish Guardians of the Galaxy let us play as the other Guardians. I know why we play as Peter, I understand the thematic importance of that, I get it, really I do, but I wish Guardians adopted a combat style similar to one of Square Enix's other games from recent years. Final Fantasy VII Remake. Cloud is the main character of that story. All of the events have a significant importance to him and his growth and his relationship with Sephiroth. He can run around the battlefield giving orders to his friends, but if we don't want to play as Cloud, we can still jump into Barrett's or Tifa's skin for a different playstyle. I wish Guardians gave us this option as well. It would help with gauging our XP too. If we're controlling Drax and he ends up doing a combo with Rocket, this would help communicate what the move is called and how much it contributes to our style meter. Changing over to Gamora would give us a different perspective and help us assess which moves rack up more points.
I get it, man. They seem really special.
They are the only thing that matters. My Hovat was the most fearless mate I've ever known. She brought me peace even during times of war. My Chimera. My innocent little Chimera. She was the best of us both. Despite her meager stature, they both were.
Seeing Drax's pain firsthand, in the moment, humanizes him more than I would have imagined when I first booted up the game. I especially love that when Drax asks Peter, "If my family are gone, what sits before me?" Peter doesn't reply with a cheesy, "Us, the Guardians, your new family." He and the game understand that Drax's joining of the Guardians doesn't remove that pain, or loss, or grief, not even a little bit, but it does help distract from it. And sometimes that's enough. Finishing Guardians, I was reminded of a model created by a grief counsellor by the name of Lois Tompkins, called Growing Around Grief. It says that people think that grief slowly gets smaller with time. In reality, grief stays the same size, but slowly life begins to grow around it. Drax's Mind Palace was where the game started to double down on its real theme, loss. Gamora mentions that every member of the Guardians have lost someone, but that fact isn't just limited to them.
A ship full of sick people just happens upon someone with limitless healing.
We were need and needed, symptom and solace. You worshipped the wonder of my ways and declared me divine.
We learn about Magus from Adam Warlock, pulling its origin straight from the comics as his dark other half. It's a being tied to the Infinity Stone which bonded with him, which feeds on grief, drains energy from those it engulfs, killing them while they serve it. Whilst being tied to Magus was painful for Warlock, it also gave him the power to heal the sick and dying, positioning himself as a god, a barrier to death. He could stop the galaxy from losing loved ones. However, Grand Unifier Raker didn't want to stop there. He, just like the Guardians, lost someone, and he thought if he could separate Warlock and Magus, he could use that power to bring back his son. Almost every character we meet in Guardians has experienced loss in some way. Peter is grieving his mother, Drax his family, Gamora, Nebula, Groot his entire planet, Rocket his soulmate, Lila. She's an otter, it's a whole thing in the comics, doesn't matter. The point is, the buck doesn't stop with the Guardians when we're talking about loss. Nikki grieves the death of her mother. Both Karel and Raker are missing their son. Even Cosmo gets a look in, mourning his Earth family while he runs Nowhere Security. The entirety of Guardians of the Galaxy is deeply rooted in a galaxy experiencing a period of loss following war. Everyone in some way is locked in a stage of grief. And whilst this isn't majorly important for how Guardians approaches this theme, I do find it interesting how it's the second game I've played this year which explores it, the other being Kena Bridge of Spirits. And while both titles were being worked on before COVID-19 struck, I do think it's interesting that the year we're coming out of the pandemic is the year we have two highly acclaimed games which look at populations in mourning. I can't help but wonder if we're entering an age of art where its themes and messages have shifted due to the pandemic. Just like how it shifted after 9/11. God, I'm mentioning COVID-19 and the Twin Towers. God, YouTube's gonna love this video. Even Mantis is struck by it. As the Guardians journey back to the Milano with Adam Warlock now in tow, the Universal Church of Truth invades, having laid siege to Nowhere and taken control of the Continuum Cortex to teleport from planet to planet. She stays behind to try and help her people, and the Guardians decide to blast off to Nowhere so they can help Cosmo protect his home. So with us surprisingly returning to a previous location, let's talk about the game's structure and its use of choices. Plot structure is hardly the sexiest thing to analyse. It always feels a little more cynical and calculating than exploring characterization or atmosphere, but Guardian's structure is calculated. Star-Lord's adventure regularly feels like it's coated in purpose, even when it's light and whimsical. This is mainly because the game is structured like a Saturday morning cartoon, and I mean that as a serious compliment. Each chapter could just as easily be an episode we papped ourselves in front of in our pajamas with a bowl of Cocoa Pops. By my count, there are 6 arcs for us to trace in our runtime, and what's really cool is that the majority of them follow the Guardians on a criminal enterprise of some sort. Even when the stakes loom large with the Church of Universal Truth, the team's solution is to embrace their role as galactic thieves. We con Lady Hellbender, hang out on a crime planet, try to kidnap Nikki, undertake a mind heist to save Drax, capture Fin Fang Foom, all culminating with an epic space battle where the gang infiltrate Sacrosanct. With Adam Warlock temporarily aboard the Milano, it helps to unify the rest of the team behind their distaste for him. Warlock's arrogance and lack of clear humanity means that there's still conflict in the plot structure, even now that the Guardians have grown closer together through their experience on Lamentis. His dialogue is so convoluted that we're encouraged to see Warlock the same way that the team does, as an irritating super weapon.
Can you confidently convince me your meager measures may amply manage this mission?
Still annoyed we didn't get to kick his ass. We are rushed from set piece to set piece which feel both self-contained and part of a larger whole. Our antics with Lady Hellbender at the start of the game could be a full Guardian story if Eidos padded it out further. New mini-goals are set for the team, like scrapping enough credits together to pay off a fine, but these mini-goals snowball into a wider narrative. The Nowhere chapter, which could be looked at as a bottle episode, giving the Guardians time to work through their issues and dropping the player numerous Easter eggs in the process, actually heightens the stakes of the Church of Universal Truth's conquest. As the Guardians battle up to Cosmo's Tower, we're shown just how powerful the Church has become. They can use the Continuum Cortex to brainwash the entire galaxy. What originally may have felt like fan service or padding is actually a pivotal plot point.
It's not exactly a conversation starter. Hi, I'm Gamora. I murdered my sister. Can we be friends? Of course we can't. How can you be friends with a monster?
This is where Gamora gets her ultimate ability, by confessing her guilt to the team and confronting her bloodthirsty past head on. We're constantly reminded of how much she cares about the children we see across our adventure. Every little girl brings back her traumatic childhood, and it's the freshness of how the game tackles this well-trod territory that defines Gamora as distinct from her comic book and movie counterparts. There's a trope in action stories called the woman-turned-warrior. It's essentially where a female character grows stronger by ridding herself of her femininity and embracing masculine stereotypes instead. Not every female superhero is a victim of this trope, but it's a perfect example of mid-2000s superhero stories swinging too far the other way to combat accusations of over-sexualizing female characters. Black Widow is one such victim of this. She's a badass, she's cold, unfeeling, and as of 2005 she also can't have kids as a result of the program which made her that way. I'd argue that comics Gamora is a victim of this as well. She's as hyper-masculine as they come, adopting all of those cold, clinical attributes we typically recognize, evolving into a hardened warrior with very little else going on outside of her relationship to Thanos, Nebula, and the other Guardians. And as much as I love the films, I think Gunn's version doesn't add much to combat this trope. Gamora's emotional range knows 2 dials, angry and cold. Eidos' Gamora goes out of its way to refute that masculinity. We see her and all of the Guardians as distinctly emotional. This mainly comes through Kimberly Sue Murray's performance, which is fantastic, but also through the dolls she collects, softening her edges. If we speak to her aboard the Milano, she even teases Peter and the player by asking, "What, I can't be feminine?" Anyway, enough about Gamora, back to the story. The team find Cosmo lost in his own promise, back when he was a blissful dog on Earth with the family he loved. In a worst game, this scene would be played off purely for laughs, but just like Drax with his family, Rocket with his fear of water, and Gamora with her dolls, it's so earnest and sincere that it's emotional. We need to talk a psychic dog down while he chases sticks in his mind, but because we, the player, need to choose what Peter says, it adds stakes and hardens the tone. Which brings me to Guardian's dialogue choices and how they impact the game's structure.
Similarly, at multiple points I would pick the less convenient dialogue option, trying to please another character, with the game doing the telltale thing of telling me they'll appreciate that, only for said characters to arbitrarily fly off the handle at me, calling me all the names under the sun and telling me to flark off before going off in a huff. It just made me wonder why I even bothered in the first place.
Despite rambling about character tropes and Gamora's femininity, this might be one of the more controversial things I say in this video, but not all game choices need consequences. I've always been struck when I hear people criticize certain games for only giving the player the illusion of choice. Player choice is a phrase used in marketing which quotes all dialogue systems, all moral quandaries with the same brush, when I'd argue there are actually two camps to how effective these systems can be. Some games promise the world that our smallest decision will have a butterfly effect on the plot, a difficult promise to keep. And some games, like Guardians, are happy to just give the player narrative involvement. Because no, obviously, you can't get any of the team killed through your choices. Ridding the Guardians of Drax, Rocket, Gamora, or Groot would make the game a lesser experience because their characterization is the core focus of this game. So there wouldn't be any joy in having Lady Hellbender lop off Rocket's head other than for the meme value. But I think there's a lot to be said for a choice-based writing style which leaves itself open to interpretation, and this is what Guardians is able to pull off incredibly well. If you let Drax throw Rocket across a chasm at the start of the game, Rocket will be annoyed with you. The structure of conversations which follow will make it organically feel like he and Groot abandoned the team on nowhere because he felt like this showed a lack of respect. However, if you don't let Drax throw Rocket across the chasm, he'll find another reason to ditch the gang. No matter what, the outcome is the same, but the game does let us feel in the moment like we had an impact on this story beat. I mentioned this before, but Guardians is less interested in galaxy-spanning consequences and more interested in letting the player craft their own Peter Quill and use him as a vehicle to mold the other Guardians. Our time with Nikki lets us feel our way to the type of father figure our version of Quill is through the dialogue choices. I mentioned before that my Peter and Drax developed a real bromance during the adventure, and that's not necessarily because the game told me so, just gave me the tools to roleplay effectively enough as Peter.
Nikki, this isn't gonna end how you think.
Says who? You? I saw what you did. You should want to take it back.
With the team shutting off the Continuum Cortex and foiling the Church's plans, it would be easy to see a couple of ways Eidos could make this scene consequence-heavy. Maybe if we were nicer to Nikki at the start of the game, she'd show signs of snapping out of her brainwashing. Maybe if we were nicer to Adam Warlock, which is a big ask, he wouldn't have set off on his own when he returned to nowhere, ending with his inevitable capture. But there's only really one moment where I think the choice system fumbles the ball, and I didn't find myself aligned with Quill. During our first visit to Nowhere, Peter is stopped at this gate by a couple of Cosmo's guards. They tell us they can't let us through, and that we need to go down this dark, spooky alleyway instead. Ooh. This is clearly a flarking mugging, and any player with 2 brain cells would see it as such. But rather than fight our way through the 4 guards that are setting us up, Quill decides off his own back that yeah, sure, we'll follow their instructions. It's a tiny beat, but it stunk to high heaven and broke my immersion, so it is worth comment. Elsewhere, there are moments where player agency is rewarded with consequences. This moment with Cosmo is a perfect example of that. If we are empathetic with him, then we can snap him out of his promise, which means he returns later during the final battle to help us out. If we can plant a seed of doubt in the world mind, that too returns, blasting apart Sacrosanct and taking us down an easier route. Choosing to sell Groot to Lady Hellbender opens up a whole new version of Chapter 4 with less goons and traps to muster through. Depending on how we handle Cammy when the Nova Corps arrest us, we can unlock an amazing section on the Milano where we need to sing "Don't Worry, Be Happy" to him. I'm not saying Guardians has 2, 3, or 4 versions of its story, or that our choices change the conclusion to the tale, but there are enough deviations to make us feel like we do have agency here. And sometimes that's all we need to emphasize that we're crafting our Guardians over the runtime. This game doesn't need Mass Effect-esque choices per minute, it needs exactly what it gives us. Chances to interact with the plot directly and co-author that narrative. So, with Adam Warlock captured by the Universal Church of Truth, and Nikki still under the thumb of Grand Unifier Raker, the Guardians regroup back on the Milano. Sacrosanct is now an impenetrable fortress, and we need to strengthen our arsenal, so what better time to talk about Collectables and the game's inherently flawed upgrade system.
And we're laughing, that's good.
It's perfect. This is us. This is how we park.
Well, this is how Quill parks anyways.
We were not fated to die this day. Unless, of course, Fin Fang Foom devours us whole.
Out of the hundreds of bite-sized interactions we get when all the Guardians are in one room, this is my favourite. Realising that they're going to need help to lay siege to Sacrosanct, the Guardians finally listen to Drax's idea at the start of the game. We journey to Maclu 4, capture the legendary Fin Fang Foom, and sell him to Lady Hellbender in return for her help. But a quick crash landing and the ridiculousness of this entire setup sends the Guardians into fits of laughter. Whilst they've already united through Gamora's breakdown and Drax's emotional confrontation with Magus, this is the scene which solidifies that. They're in good spirits, and we'll see a shift in the combat dialogue and the exploration mechanics which directly reflect this. The bickering is over. This final quarter is all about the banter. While we explore Maclu 4, the Guardians will start to act as a team of their own accord. Groot will spread himself over bridges, Rocket will climb into vents, all without us needing to ask them. Peter has become a formal leader, not by necessarily earning the Guardians' respect or having them trust in his decision-making, but through his sheer earnestness and commitment to keeping the team together. There's a trust which has grown during their escapades. They don't come together behind Peter, they cooperate equally, and I love this. Our time on this planet slightly outstays its welcome though. Pacing-wise, it truly feels like we're in the end game now and we just want to get to the dragon, but instead we're mustering through ice caps and caves, waiting for Fin Fang Foom to appear. Whilst there is a gradual, ominous build-up to seeing Foom in the flesh, the mechanical payoff is too weak to make it feel like it was worth it. His presentation as a boss is awe-inspiring, a massive space dragon looming above us, but the actual battle is more of the same. We've lived through this battle before with the Dweller in Darkness. He doesn't move, has huge slam attacks, and rains ice from on high, meaning the team have to work together to stun him so we can send one of the Guardians up there to do some real damage. So while Drax sings his hunting songs and the Guardians hunt for a dragon, let's talk about the collectibles, because this is a part of the game that's kind of a tale of two halves. While out in the world we can find readable articles, costumes, objects which unlock chats with the other Guardians, components and advanced components. I already discussed how enticing the articles are, and objects like a doll for Gamora tie directly with the best stuff that the game has to offer, chatting to our space friends. Costumes are bloody lovely, that's the best way I can describe them. In total, we can find 40 of these, 12 for Star-Lord and 7 for each of the Guardians. Every single possible costume is accessible in-game. If you pre-ordered Guardians, you get a couple of these early, but they are not exclusive to the pre-order audience. There are no microtransactions, no packs to buy, no Verizon-themed outfits, no exclusive content of any sort. The kind of game I played will be identical to the kind of game you played. Isn't that nice?
Like Kate, Clint comes with loads of outfits.
The outfits are varied enough to add a real thrill, whether you're a comics fan or not. It sounds so silly, but they're not necessarily just paint jobs for the Guardians. There's texture here. Costumes with capes have cape physics attached. Quill gets a brand new mask with each of his outfits, rather than just his lower half. But I do have an issue with how the game economy works. See, because Guardians is so linear, we can't return to any of the planets we've previously journeyed to. Those planets also have numerous points of no return, which aren't clearly communicated to a player, either explicitly or intuitively. So if you miss an outfit on, say, Lamentis, and then walk 10 feet and hit a cutscene, that outfit is locked off forever. There's no way for you to find it. Regularly, the game offers up 2 pathways for the player to take during exploration. If you go left, you'll continue the story. If you go right, you'll find a collectible. But which path is optional? Which one holds a secret? And which one holds more plot? There were times that I would get halfway through a planet and kick myself that I hadn't been able to find an outfit yet, reflecting that it must have been one of those alternate path moments from earlier, and there'd be no way for me to go back and get it. This structuring is fine, it's a casualty of the linear, story-driven gameplay that makes Guardians such a delight, but as a result, the game needed to give us the opportunity to access those outfits in a separate location. There's one simple way to solve this. A shop terminal on board the Milano would give us the chance to purchase any outfits we might have missed once we leave the planet. We wouldn't make players purchase these with real-world money because we're not grubby little worm people, instead we'd make more use of units. During certain plot moments, the Guardians accrue a bunch of units. For example, Lady Hellbender's vault has a crap ton to pick up if we hang around long enough to frantically scavenge them. We can only spend these units in one place while we're wandering around nowhere, and nothing we buy with them offers up any real value. We can get mugged off by gambling them, we can buy a Nova Interceptor, which doesn't work, so offering up more ways to earn units in-game, or perhaps dotting them throughout the world while we explore, would further incentivize exploration and give us a plan B if we fail to find all of the costumes. You might argue that this would overcomplicate the economy. Suddenly we'd have units, components, and advanced components to juggle, and I would agree, but components have their own set of problems which I really hope are remedied for the inevitable sequel. But let's take a quick pause on that, because the team have just killed Fin Fang Foom, Groot's resurrected him because reasons, and Lady Hellbender has entered the ring.
Someone needs to take a stand against the church. I could really use some help.
You pay one debt, then create another.
No, though I can kind of see...
Enough. I will gather my forces.
There's a warmth to Lady Hellbender's agreement to help us in order to protect her bestiary. Seeing her with Fin Fang Foom specifically sets her apart from the likes of the Collector. She truly cares for these creatures. She's ready to rain down hellfire on us for accidentally killing Foom until Mantis intercepts her. With our temporary alliance, the Guardians prepare for their invasion of Sacrosanct. Mantis returns to the Milano with us, and the game explains in no uncertain terms that this is it. This is the point of no return. We won't see the quarters again until we hit the credits, so while we prepare, let's return to upgrades. Guardians of the Galaxy does not need 2 upgrade currencies at all. They're not even named all that different. Components and advanced components have nothing which distinguish them mechanically. They're both just as easy to find, they're not used for separate upgrades. More often than not, the player will find themselves just frustrated because they have loads of one type of currency, but not enough of the other. And when we venture off the beaten path to hunt for components, there's every chance we'll just pick up more of the stuff we have too much of. With no definitive way to segregate one type of upgrade currency from the other, the easiest way to ease that frustration and convolution would be to scrap advanced components and replace it with units. That way we'd have one currency to bolster our abilities and one currency for the fluffier stuff like outfits. Hell, maybe we could buy more songs for the jukebox to keep units relevant. The raid on Sacrosanct is balls to the wall, unabashed badassery of the highest order. We kick off with a dogfight while we fly into the center of the ship, all to the tune of Iron Maiden's Flight of Icarus, which is specifically worth comment because it's a tune and the same song Marvel's Avengers played when Iron Man blasted into space. Except here the audio mixing is crisp and clean so we can actually hear the bloody thing. Lady Hellbender rides atop Fin Fang Foom, chomping on cultist spaceships while her beast soars through space, punching holes in the church's ship. We fight through Sacrosanct's golden corridors and in the artificial gravity of the outside of the spacecraft, all without our precious cassette player because Rocket used it as a distraction. Peter's longing for his music undercuts a lot of the first half of this battle, but it feels fantastic when we get it back with a huddle already activated. And that hero shot is something you could plaster on the cover of a comic book. If you play your cards right, Cosmo joins the fray, using the head of the Nowhere Celestial to kick so much ass. Even the World Mind joins in, frying a bunch of church droids and making a tough battle a hell of a lot easier. It's a shame then that this badassery doesn't translate to the upgrades we can unlock with our components. How's that for a transition? There's not loads to say here, but it's worth noting. Quail's weakness during combat isn't helped by how deflating his upgrade tree is. The more expensive unlocks boil down to more shields, faster cooldowns, and these are useful, true, but they're grossly uninteresting and the accessibility features kind of undermine them. As a result, they don't really merit the cost. They are pretty well balanced, it's impossible to unlock them all before Macluth 4, but that balance means very little when you've spent 1,000 components on the ability to uselessly scan enemies during fights. While you can only implement these upgrades at particular moments, using workbenches appearing throughout the world, the feeling of upgrading Peter needs to be exciting, but at no point during my time with the game did I think, oh great, there's a workbench. Instead, I often decided to leave that stuff for when I was back on the Milano.
Let me guess, Raker's power proved more pernicious than predicted?
There is little point pondering possibilities past, daughter of Thanos. Soon feverous faith will flood Raker's fledgling and feed the fiend within.
Not gonna happen. We're gonna shut it down together. Right?
Rescuing Warlock from his prison, the Guardians prepare for the final showdown. The Golden God, realizing that he can't defeat Raker alone, reluctantly repairs his ratty relationship with the rest of the Guardians. He agrees to help us rip Magus from Nikki, and we set off for the grand finale. And I'm sorry to say that with a single exception, it's here that the game falls apart. Let's start with the good. Our big, fat confrontation with Raker begins as soon as the Guardians rush into his chamber. Nikki is spasming faith juice out across the galaxy and brainwashing those lost souls looking to be healed. Peter is shot sideways into Nikki's promise again, but we learned this isn't Nikki's promise. It never was. It's one of Peter's. This happy family, Corell's birthday, Nikki calling him dad, living a peaceful life aboard Hallis Hope, this is one of Peter's utopias. It's his wish for life after Meredith. Sure, he couldn't save his mother all of those years ago, but we see through his eyes a potential future that he wants to salvage from the life he currently leads.
Okay, I get it. I have a lot of making up to do.
Peter.
If we're gonna do this...
I'm dead, Peter.
Yeah, but... not like dead, right? I heard your voice. No, you brought me here. I'm seeing you here now.
You're seeing a ghost.
We think we need to snap Nikki out of Magus's control, but Peter is the one who needs to snap out of it. He's not just grieving his mother from all those years ago, he, just like Nikki, is lost in grieving for Corell. That's why he's lost in the same promise as Nikki. They both want the same thing, a happy, united family. Peter is the last Guardian to not accept that he has this already. This is beautiful and tragic and horrible. Peter's heart breaks when he realizes he's not Nikki's father. We see that for all of his playfulness and his denial with the Guardians, he really wanted this deep down. He was building himself up, ready for fatherhood. And the only way to break this is to break the illusion itself. We trash all of Nikki's hard work, the cake, the gift, while she cries. It's like when we had to shoot Meredith in the mid-game. It's not a fair thing to ask of Peter, but he steps up and owns the difficulty of the task. And when this alone doesn't work, the game asks the player to take on that task through controlling Peter's dialogue. Peter states outright that there's a lot of things he doesn't know, and that one of those things is how to console a 12-year-old's very legitimate grief, so we need to help him. We navigate a conversation with Nikki where blaming other people and living in denial are options to choose, but they won't help her. What does is trusting her, offering her a symbolic ritual through lighting a candle to remember Corell. It wraps a bow around Guardian's contemplation of grief and loss. It's an emotional rollercoaster of a puzzle we need to figure out. It's when Nikki snaps out of her promise, rips herself from Magus and undergoes her transformation, that the game tumbles into a downward spiral. It's important for me to note that while I'm going to rip into Guardian's finale here, I don't think it undermines all of the great stuff we've discussed so far. The characterization, world building, and atmosphere is not undermined by the underwhelming final hour. But it's still pretty bad.
Turn in the light, Shadow! Hey, weirdo!
Raker's boss fight sucks, but it doesn't suck as bad as the game gating him off behind a fight with 4 church wizards. This is totally unnecessary, summoned purely to pad out the final countdown. Raker himself is just tedious to battle. He has the ability to shut the Guardians up, incapacitating them so we can't use their various abilities, and while the team can still chew on him without Peter's direct intervention, their effectiveness in battle is only ever determined by what we choose to do with them. This means that there's a good chunk of this fight which is given over to Peter fighting him essentially alone because the rest of the Guardians keep getting downed, frozen, or trapped, and because of Raker's insistence on constantly raising a massive shield, the fight becomes more drawn out than it ought to. This wouldn't be too much of a problem if the whole thing wasn't such an eyesore. Generally, Guardians is able to use the dynamism of its environments and the contrast of enemies against those environments, so we never feel like we're rapid fire blinking to keep up with the action. unlike another game we already talked about. But the laser beam light show happening in the background of this fight uses identical shades to Raker's attacks, the traps he places around the arena, Raker himself, and the shield he pulls up, so quite regularly you'll lose track of what you're looking at. Maybe I'm alone in this one, and if I am, please do let me know, but the color grading is obtuse and obnoxious, so this fight becomes difficult to read, and the clunk doesn't stop there.
So, we actually won?
Fucking right we did.
We must save the entire galaxy more often.
Count me in! Next time, I promise I won't almost destroy it first.
So we won? We won, right? It feels like we won, but the warped camera angle fixated in front of the Guardians so they awkwardly strut towards us while the camera tries to flee from them makes the hero walk we're supposed to be enjoying feel off. Of course, this is arguably the point. Once the credits roll, we even start to see some developer names glitch and transform into Magus over and over, foreshadowing the game's true finale just moments away. In isolation, this choice may just seem like an experiment that doesn't work. Sometimes you try something that doesn't resonate with your audience. In this case, the hero strut was that thing, and I was the audience. All of this could be firmly put down to my experience and my opinion, but the game's final chapter feels plastered on out of necessity and is by far the biggest disappointment of the game.
Don't worry about little old me. I feel simply fabulous.
Magus takes over Adam Warlock and transforms him into his final form. In his words, the new norm. With Nikki Gold making a permanent new addition to the team, the goal here is to lure him in close by annoying him, so that Nikki can get close enough to rip Magus from the Soul Stone. But this isn't challenging, or interesting, or deep like the task of separating Nikki from Magus. It's similar in idea to the finale of Doctor Strange, where he wears Dormammu down by using the Time Stone and irritating him to defeat. But the structuring of this battle is all wrong. It's regularly interrupted by Magus summoning easy cannon fodder enemies that barely pose a threat, and that structure dismisses all possible dramatic tension from this battle. After the intense high-stakes fight through the church and the emotional payoff of healing Nikki, so much of Magus's boss feels like it was stapled on because Eidos felt like it had to be here, rather than giving it the care and attention of the rest of the campaign. To be fair, describing our conflict with Magus as a boss fight is kind of unfair to the rest of the game's bosses, as disappointing as they are as well. We don't actually do anything to Magus. We just pick from one of two insults before slouching our way through some low-level enemies, rinse and repeat. Not a single punch is thrown, and as a result, it begs the question, if this was the best that Guardians of the Galaxy could come up with for Magus, why didn't they let us fight Adam Warlock when we first met him? The bombastic beatdown of all the Guardians working together to keep the stone away from Magus, set to the final countdown of all things, is obviously the kind of fist pump flark yeah moment which reminds a player why they've enjoyed so much of the game up until now. This is cool, bringing in the best of the Guardians' character writing and style as a pocket-sized love letter to the player and the story. I just wish it was to the backdrop of a real boss to act as the firework to Guardians' ever-burning, entertaining bonfire.
They have good qualities. I mean, Drax is fearless, and he's been a dad. Groot, he's compassionate and protective. Rocket can teach her about crawling into things, and Gamora. Gamora. She knows about honor and discipline and girl stuff. Yeah, so even if you don't have what it takes by yourself, you're not by yourself!
It's apt that before the real credits roll, our final scene is Peter debating himself in a mirror. Even if we choose the more pessimistic options in this chat, Peter's naive whimsy and wholesomeness ekes out. Every character grows by the time we get here, especially Star-Lord, who comes to terms with his inevitable parental role in Nikki's life, regardless of the fact he's not her birth father. Guardians' ending may have all the mechanical and structural weight of a shoestring, but it's greater than the sum of those final moments. These are the all-new, all-different Guardians of the Galaxy, which builds the team out from the 5 one-trick ponies we know to something altogether funny, heartfelt, and multi-dimensional. Rocket is more than scarred, distrusting, and a master strategist. He's also fiercely loyal. Groot is more than his gentle wisdom. He's an eternal optimist. Drax is more than fueled by rage, trapped in a past tragedy. He's meditative and spiritual. Gamora is more than her deadly wit. She's full of heart. And Peter Quill is more than an inspiring, if obnoxious, leader. He's earnest and wholesome, and he's got this. Kind of. Marvel's Avengers isn't the reason Guardians of the Galaxy will be remembered so fondly. By contrast and comparison, the two are different games, different experiences, and I'll have very different memories of both. In fact, playing Guardians just made me more angry that we didn't get this kind of cultivated, charming experience with Earth's mightiest heroes, and I still think we were robbed of that by Square Enix's greed and Crystal Dynamics' eagerness to be an accomplice. But despite all of this, despite the reviews reminding us of Guardians' scut-covered cousin, despite the fact I've taken the time to compare the two in this critique, I hope history doesn't count both games on the same chart. All you really need to make a fun superhero game is a sense of style, satisfying action, and a narrative problem which is engaging for a player to overcome with a character they care about. Guardians goes beyond this. The style feels in keeping with the iconography of the team we know and love, but envelopes every inch of its playtime. Whilst this action isn't perfect, there are moments where it absolutely is satisfying to play with. The narrative doesn't just give us a problem, it gives us a reason to care about that problem. And it doesn't just give us one character to love, it gives us a few. There isn't an ounce of cynicism in its runtime, just a love letter to these galactic pirates and the rich stories that they share. It doesn't ask anything of the player other than to sit back and enjoy the ride. It's a rock and roller coaster, and well worth the price of admission. Thanks for watching. This will be the last critique of the year, but not the last video. I'm hoping to release a few essays on the openings of Kingdom Hearts games before Christmas. If you're new to the channel and you liked this, feel free to like, subscribe, and hell, check out my critiques on Insomniac's 2 Spider-Man games, links below. Scrolling up the left side of my screen are my patrons. These guys are complete legends. They've helped me invest in improving the quality of my videos, so order of thanks go to Tempe, Courtney Wampler, Anthony Holder, Pierre Carreur, Sergey Darn, James Rush, David J. Morin, Stephen Faeo, Minute Zero, Iskerton, Callum Armitage, Christopher Tierney, Torstein Sunness, Fipsy, Derek DeRosia, Luca, Tom Inns, Heliquin, Matthias Santoro, Retarget, Sierra Purnell, James Keysbury, Jordan, Kazi7, Uncle Mr. Bones, Alberto Calles, Stephen Atkins, Austin Hagerman, Lee, Austin Long, Type Braz, Matthew Bendel, Dini, Zachary Powers, Andrew Muinos, Compulsory Fungus, Loar Zappelli, Prospero finished my dissertation, Neuen Guterres Nopov, Lizzie Gale, Salvador Castillo, Alan Black, David Bedard, Ross Williamson, Derek 8, The Rift Maker, CC, Jared Halfer, Graham McLaughlin, Semlin, Beth Littler, Oliver Farrell, John Foster Agg, Robert Capel, Elevator, Rose Bernarda, Matt McCulloch, Guillermo Barreros Ferreira, Ethan, Paul W, Damp Gibbon, Please Don't Blame, Chief Sweep, Ehor May, Jonathan Lum, Paper Synth, Thomas Banchak, Eddie Wingfors, Reese Newton Seeley, Nicholas Here, Cakesters, Strupp, Angry Optimist, Plague Doctor, Adriana Martinez, Jana Grasfrau, Chris, Jake Kluzovitz, Long Cheddar, Jordan Halsey, Amory Selden, DB Geek, Ryan Smith, Talkster, Donis Comba, Ashley Broning, 100 Sams, Neil Dudgeon, Michael Diaz, Nathaniel Waters, Dinkin Pearson, Kyle Pears, Seb Scott, Lonely Ronin, Chris Bread, Zephyr Don, Kane Highwind, Neve Care, and Johnny Miller. Thank you guys so much, and take care.